everyone. It's B2B or Not to Be, presented by Lisa Zone, who is the Managing Director for Dixon Eaton. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for this session, the Summit County Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Board and InfoStation. And I want to go ahead and take just a few moments to introduce Lisa. Again, Lisa has spent 15 years at Dixon Eaton, and she's used her skills to actually develop and execute integrated marketing communication programs for a wide variety of business-to-business as well as consumer organizations. And Lisa's done a lot. Her expertise is in branding and image, campaign, social media marketing, product launches, consumer and trade media relations, and trade show management, as well as special event planning. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Have you guys ever had someone read your bio while you're standing there? It's very weird. Anyhow, welcome this morning. How many of you work in a B2B organization? Okay, good. So hopefully this will be helpful. I had set up a discrete Twitter hashtag for folks to ask live questions during the session, but given the size of the room, please feel free to raise your hand or shout out a question while we are going, because I'd rather do questions as we go versus waiting till the end. So please feel free to do that. So first, a few ground rules. One, the Youtoo LZQ. You can use this after today's session too. If you think of something afterward and want to send it to me, that'll just be an easy way for me to make sure I don't miss a mention from you. If you're going to post pictures, take pictures from above. It makes everyone look skinnier, and use your skinny filter on Instagram, please. If you want to email me questions after today, go ahead and shoot me an email. My email address is here, and it's easily findable online. You can also comment on the event recap I'll be posting on the D&E blog sometime next week. I haven't decided because I'm not sure what I'm going to say. But feel free to comment there, and I can answer questions you may have there. Or tweet my bosses and tell them how awesome I did. And if you want to go ahead and do that, this is Scott and Chaz. Scott's our CEO, and Chaz is our president and COO. So let's get into why you are probably here in this session. It's likely that you own social media within your B2B organization. How many of you own B2B within your, or own social media? Okay. Or no one owns social media within your B2B organization. How many of you fall in that camp? Kind of. We see this a lot with our B2B clients, that nobody really owns it. So a lot of times the corporate communications department ends up picking it up and taking it, because they are most often the stewards of the brand, where the marketing communications folks are more focused on product. The corporate communications folks a lot of times are more focused on brand. So if no one owns social within your organization, I would encourage you to take it and own it, and go to your boss with a recommended strategy, with which hopefully we can outline a little bit more today. There's a third camp, your B2B, you're already doing some stuff, but maybe they need a little bit of juice or refinement. How many of you fall into that category? Okay. So again, feel free to ask questions along the way. Last reason, Amanda's session was probably full, so you popped over here. Why I'm here, one, I want to try to help to provide a process that you guys can follow. What we have found with our B2B clients is often they come to us and say, I don't know where to start. It seems really overwhelming. I'm sure maybe those of you who do it have an idea, but maybe convincing your bosses is another story. So what we have found works really well is to identify a process, and early in the process to have deliverables that you can give to your boss, because that also makes it feel more real to them. So any way you can figure out how to provide deliverables early in the process is going to help your case to your bosses, because they'll be able to see what it is you're talking about. And we have some examples to share with you there. The other idea is to remind you about all the stakeholders you should be thinking about. A lot of times when people talk about B2B social media, they're really only talking about customers. That's a really important audience, but it's not the only audience. If you're a public company, you have investors or stakeholders, and they use social media a lot to do research. So at Dixon Eaton, we have an investor relations practice, and those folks are always studying how investors are using social media to inform decisions about how they purchase stock. So that's a really important stakeholder group as well as employees, whether they're existing employees or prospective employees. Those are all stakeholders of your organization and the communities you do business in. So don't just think about customers when you're thinking about B2B social media. Think about all of your stakeholders. And every stakeholder may have a different need or specific way you need to reach them. I'll also try to give you guys some helpful tips, some cautionary tales that we have come across as part of working with a lot of B2B companies on social media endeavors. And just to legitimize the time I spend on Twitter at work. So why social media? So here's some statistics that we have pulled together that we use with clients a lot. These are a few years old. But I can't imagine that maybe they're a year old. I can't imagine they've changed too much. But 69% of B2B companies ignore customers who provide feedback via social media because they have no process in place to respond. That's a really bad reason to not respond to customers because they are using social because they want that engagement, they want that interaction. So to not engage with them is a really huge missed opportunity for you. We have seen some B2B companies monitor mentions of competitors, and when they see somebody complaining about a competitive product, they swoop in because they're using social media smartly. So if you are not monitoring for those conversations, you are really missing out. 26% of B2B marketers don't know how to measure social media success. I don't know that that's just B2B. I think B2Cs struggle with the same thing too, and that's going to be a theme that I'm going to talk about. While there is a distinction between B2C and B2B companies, you can learn a lot from what B2C companies do and apply them in a B2B setting. So I think it's important to always stay on top of the latest trends about what B2Cs are doing because it can inform what you guys should be doing as B2B marketers. 60% of businesses don't have an integrated social media strategy. They either do nothing, track, or only follow up. And 63% of B2B marketers are either vaguely aware or not aware of what is being said about their companies online. I will give you an example of this. We did a social media audit for a client, which I will talk about audits in a minute. Because they're a public company and their board asked them to do an audit because they wanted to know what risk they faced by not being involved in social media. So we did this audit and we uncovered that there was someone who had reserved this company's name as a Twitter handle. It's not a normal everyday word. I'm not sure how this guy ended up using this company's name as his Twitter handle, but the things he was tweeting out from that account were nothing that the company would want associated with them. And what was happening is when you Googled the company's name, this Twitter account was showing up alongside legitimate corporate announcements. So even though they weren't doing it, someone was doing it, and you can imagine the impression that an investor might have had when they went and Googled the company's name and they saw earnings releases and then they saw this Twitter account that clearly had nothing to do with the company, but that immediate reaction you have leaves leaves a memory about what they think about your company. So we'll talk a little bit about what you need to think about when you do that. Why social media? I know this is really hard to see. The reason I included it is because I actually brought for everybody this lovely infographic because I just thought the title of it was funny, which is Social Media for Unsexy B2B Industries. But it actually has a lot of really good information in it. So after this session is over, come on up and grab one. You may need a what are those things called? A magnifying glass. You may need a magnifying glass to look at some of them, but the source is at the bottom, so you can look it up online then and kind of blow it up for yourself. So the important thing to know is social media is not going away for B2Bs, so it's important to figure out the early adopters are going to have the best opportunity to use it. Generally, the top B2B platforms are LinkedIn and Twitter, because everybody thinks of LinkedIn as a business social media platform. Twitter, obviously, is a place that lots of conversations are happening. Other places that we see particularly useful for B2Bs are blogs, corporate blogs, which our recommendation is always, if you're going to start a corporate blog, to consider putting together a blogging team, and so that it's not one person's job to keep the blog up. It also provides the readers an opportunity to get to know the full depth and services of your organization, because a lot of our B2B clients struggle with cross-selling because the sales guy knows this product but doesn't sell this product. So if you can sort of curate conversations that allow your customers to see that you're more than just what maybe they're being represented, you can use your corporate blog in a really effective way to do that. We also see lots of B2B conversations happening on forums and discussion boards. So that's a really good way for you to monitor what's being said, to know what is keeping your customers up at night. That can really be really rich market research for you to understand what kinds of things you should be thinking about, whether you're developing products or marketing products. And we always encourage, if there's something that needs to be addressed, have somebody go into that discussion and address it. The only rules are to be transparent about the fact that you represent your company, not that you're trying to, plant awesome remarks about your company. That's a huge no-no. But if you can go in and answer questions, that shows that whole community then that you are trying to help them, because everyone else is going to see that too. Any questions so far? I haven't checked the hashtag. Has anyone tweeted questions to me?
Lisa, you might get to it later, but
Yeah.
I have one question related to the guy having that Twitter handle. We have a similar situation where we just changed the name of one of our subsidiaries, and the Facebook account is actually held by a person. What is the best way to just contact them to see if they'll release it to you? It's kind of an
Is it a person that works for your organization?
like I checked the Facebook /
Terms of service?
just the name of our new subsidiary is.
Right.
It's being held by, an individual.
So we've done it a couple of ways. You can contact the owner, if you can figure out who it is, and ask them if they will relinquish control of the page to you. There are also more formal ways you can do it. All of the social platforms have ways to petition to get control back if you can prove that you are the brand owner. So you can kind of figure out which way makes the most sense. Interesting. Okay, does that answer your question? And we can talk more after if you want to. This is also a seeing eye chart, but I wanted to share it with you because you can look it up online. So if you go to CMO.com, this is actually the 2013 version, I believe. They came out with the 2014 version, but it was portrait, not landscape, so it didn't work in my presentation. But it's got very similar information. But I think this is a good source, again, if you're trying to convince your bosses about the importance of social media. This goes through kind of each of the most popular platforms, and then how you can use it: customer communication, brand exposure, traffic to your website, SEO. So there are lots of good reasons for why you would want to use social beyond just engaging in conversations. And this chart is kind of a nice, handy cheat sheet to help you make that case to your bosses, because I know that's a lot of times the biggest challenge. So if you go on CMO.com and just search for CMO's Guide to Social Media Landscape, it'll pop up. So social media stakeholders, we talked a little bit about this already. So who do you need to think about when you are developing your social media strategy or plans? Do you have customers? Yes. Do you have competitors? Yes. Investors? Not everybody's going to have investors. But if you do, those are really, really important audiences to think about. Do you need to attract or retain talent? Yes. Do you maintain media relationships? Probably. How many of you have some sort of media relations or PR program in place? Right. So most of those folks are using social media. So sometimes they will tweet you a question because they want to get the answer in the way they want the answer. So you have to be available to them in the places they are looking for information. Or do you do businesses within communities? A lot of our clients, they have plants in various communities. So they want to build relationships with the folks in those communities in case, God forbid, something were to happen at one of those plants. There's a fire or there's it's emitting some sort of smell into the local community. As you can imagine, people who live in that community are not going to be really excited about that. But if you have some sort of relationship already with that community via social media, they're going to be a lot more likely to forgive you and to understand the situation versus you trying to start up a conversation on social in reaction to a crisis. That's never the best time to put a social media program in place. I included this slide only because everyone's always like, who's doing it? I need case studies. That question drives me crazy, though, because you don't know what the strategy was, right? You don't know what they're trying to accomplish. But I included it because I knew I'd get the question, and I didn't want to not have an answer. So this is actually from a socialmediab2b.com, which is a great resource. If you don't already go there, socialmediab2b.com. They a lot of times do include B2C stories, but again, it's because you can make connections between what a consumer company is doing and how B2Bs can use it too. This is from 2011, but pretty much if you look at any new lists that are around what B2B companies are using social best, these companies are all on it, it's just different order. So I didn't order it, we just kind of have all the logos on here. But that's from socialmediab2b.com. So the process. Like I said, many of our clients don't know where to start when they're talking about social media. So what we thought we would do is define a really specific process to follow because a lot of times our client contacts get it, but their bosses don't. So the idea of creating a process so that it doesn't feel like, oh my God, we're jumping in head first right from the outset, really makes our clients feel comfortable. So it may be something you may want to take to your organization as well. To try to figure out how you can get your social programs either more fully engaged or up and running. So I'm going to talk about each of these 4 pieces within the social media process in the next several slides. But the process we have identified is first a social media audit, then a social media workshop, then a social media playbook, and then monitoring, which never ends. How many of you do social media monitoring? Good, a lot of you. Good. So the first piece is the audit. Now these graphics are all coming from a B2B social media graphic that's actually on the Dixon Eaton website. So if you go to the D&E website, we have a page dedicated to B2B social media, and you can find the full infographic there. So I know, again, this is an eye chart and you can't read it, which is why we did this. So the pieces of an audit are really, the purpose of an audit is to help you identify where your opportunities are, if there are opportunities, because you may find that maybe there aren't opportunities for your company. I doubt it. Most of any audit we've ever done has led to clients understanding that they need to do more with their social media programs. But at least you can say, this is what we found out. So the pieces of an audit are really to assess how your company and its peers are doing over a 30-day listening period. We say 30 days because we usually do 30 days because we get enough conversations that you start seeing themes over 30 days. If you are a public company, we always encourage to do it over a 30-day period that would include your earnings announcements because we see lots of spikes when earnings announcements happen. Or if you know that you have a big announcement coming, you may want to do the monitoring over that time so you can see how big announcements impact conversations. Maybe it's a big trade show, maybe you're doing a product launch, maybe you're naming a new head of sales. There are any number of things to take into consideration during the time that you might be thinking about doing an audit. So what we do is we use Radian 6. How many of you use Radian 6? Okay. It's expensive, which is why we as an agency have it, and it doesn't cost our client. We can sort of spread the cost out for a lot of clients versus them having to buy it just for themselves. So if you are a corporate marketer, if you have an agency partner or you want to find an agency partner, that hopefully will mitigate the cost a little bit for you too. The other thing then we do is a manual review of all of the social channels for your company and up to 5 competitors. So we look at their Facebook, their Twitter, their YouTube, and really look at it and say, this is how many followers they have, this is how often they're posting, this is what their engagement looks like. And we have kind of done it in just like a Word doc chart format. Again, then you can standardize it from company to company. It's a deliverable that you can hand to your bosses that they can look at and say, oh, I get it now. So it's really an easy tool. So even if you don't have Radian 6, you can at the very least do we call it a channel audit. So we look at all of the channels that the company has, including a corporate blog, and we'll look at what are not generally B2B social platforms too, maybe like Instagram, because some B2B companies are using Instagram. So we identify at the outset all of the platforms we're going to look at, and then we will look at all of those for each of the companies. Some companies also have zillions of Twitter handles, which is something we can talk about if anybody's interested. So companies that are highly diversified, so they have lots of business units that maybe are not interconnected. They will have Twitter handles for each of the businesses because their audiences, their customers do not overlap. But then there's nobody speaking from the corporate voice because no one has a corporate account that's talking about major corporate events, whether it's earnings or a new CEO or maybe some sort of community day. You guys are doing community service day and you want people to know about it. So CSR is becoming increasingly more important as you think about your corporate B2B social media strategy, because customers in the B2B space want to know what companies are doing for their CSR efforts. Everyone knows what CSR is? So corporate social responsibility. So that's everything from trying to reduce the amount of paper you use to getting involved in your communities. So it's really broad. But social media is a great way to tell that story. So we look at all of that. We analyze what's being said. Here we'll take a look at, a lot of times we'll say to our clients, give us the list of 5 things you want to be known for. So they give us that list of 5 things. And then we do the audit, and we get the list, and we say, here are the 5 things you're being talked about right now. And most often they don't match up at all. So then our clients have to make the decision, okay, do we want to take advantage of the existing conversations and build on them, or do we want to switch the conversation? But if you don't know that up front, there's no way for you to develop your content strategy. There's no way for you to really know what kinds of things you should be talking about because you don't know what you're already being talked about. Then the next piece would be to recommend what your social media strategy should be. That could be you, that could be your agency partner doing it, but really saying, okay, we know now that all of the conversations are happening on Twitter and forums. Let's start there. Because again, it's really scary to say, let's do everything from the outset. So if you do an audit and you can see where conversations are happening, doesn't it make sense to try to get involved in those conversations instead of trying to create completely new ones, unless you have somebody who is assigned to do social media and only social media, which I highly doubt, because most B2B companies do not have a dedicated social media person. It's generally added onto the PR person's job or the media relations person's job. Sometimes there's a digital team and it falls there. It doesn't fall anywhere regularly, but those are most often where we see it falling. The audit also is obviously going to provide you benchmarking data. So you can say, a lot of things we look at during an audit is tone of the conversations. Are they positive, negative, or neutral? And then over time, we measure and say, okay, we were able to influence the tone of the conversations to be more positive or less negative. We can look at share of voice. So we look at how much are you being talked about versus how much are your competitors being talked about. And again, benchmark against it. You can say, okay, before we started doing anything, here's what our percentage was in the pie. Now that we're 6 months into the program, here's what our percentage is. Hopefully it's going to be a good story for you and it's going to be moving in the right direction. But if you don't do an audit, you don't have anything to measure against. So that's really important to do this audit piece. This is an example of, I pulled this out of an audit we did for a client a couple of years ago. So this was the where conversations are happening for this specific brand. So you can see when we looked at it, most of the conversations were happening on micromedia, which is Twitter, and forum replies, which are discussion boards. Very little was happening on, well, other is kind of generally, it can be anything. Sometimes we see lots more conversations on like mainstream news sites that maybe they have an online component of, and people, there's lots of conversation there. So we see, okay, we should start focusing on that area. So this is obviously one example, and there are lots and lots and lots of more charts in every audit that we do. Any questions on audits?
How much time do you spend on average audit?
So the hardest part, so there's two hard parts. One is getting the profile set up the right way, because you have to do a lot of refining once you set it up and you start seeing what starts filtering in. You've got to start filtering out terms so you're not getting a bunch of crap that you don't want in your survey. So that takes, generally that takes us a week to really feel good about the end of, by the end of the week, we feel really good about how the profile is set up. Then generally, once we close out the 30 days and go and actually analyze the data, because services like Radian6 are great as clipping services, but they don't really do a ton of analysis. So that's our job, to look at it and really score everything. So we generally take 2 weeks to look through that, develop the report, and make recommendations. Is that helpful? Okay, I want to keep moving. So workshops. So social media workshops are a great way, once you have that initial data, to pull together a cross-functional team to talk about, okay, what is our corporate social media philosophy or strategy? So when we do workshops, we always recommend including a cross-functional team, not just the communicators, but communicators, people in marketing communications or marketing, however your company is set up, HR, IT, and legal. Because those people are the ones who you get really far down the path and they say, wait, we didn't know we were doing this. We can't do this. So if you include them in the conversation at the outset, you'll know whatever their concerns are at the beginning so that you don't go all the way down a path and realize, oh man, we can't do this. So we always recommend to try to get that cross-functional team in the room at the beginning to talk about the corporate philosophy and strategy around social media. A lot of times what we'll do heading into it, though, is to do a survey to understand what is everybody's understanding of social, what does everyone think about it, before we even get into the room. So that's one way to think about. Then we also know what things we need to talk about during the survey or the workshop itself. So we usually do, it usually takes 3 hours. So we usually say it's a half hour or a half day survey. But coming out of that, we have a lot of information then to either develop the corporate social media strategy or to work on the next piece, which I'll talk about, which is the social media playbook. So this also works well if you have a company that has lots of distributors that represent your brand in the marketplace, or if you have lots of business units, to get folks who represent each of the business units in the room. You don't want to have 50 people in the conversation, but you need to have a good cross-section of your organization to understand how your company should be approaching social media from a corporate perspective. And then the workshop, toward the end of it, you're going to be able to create kind of the roadmap, get everybody to agree on it, and then move, so that you're not coming up against roadblocks as you get further in. So the next piece is a social media playbook. I have a sample of one that we completed maybe a month or so ago for Lubrizol. I cannot give this to anybody because obviously it contains proprietary information about the company. We protect these social media playbooks with our lives. But I thought if anybody wants to kind of see what goes into a playbook, I also recognize it's unusual to print a book around social media, but sometimes just having it printed is helpful. But the idea behind a social media playbook is to identify situational chapters that you might be using social media for your business. We do it that way instead of by platform because, so for example, we did a playbook for, we worked on a playbook with Diebold. And they had folks who were just charged with doing events. Were they going to have to read the whole social media playbook to understand? They had to read each chapter on Facebook, Twitter, whatever, to understand how they should use social media for events. Why wouldn't we just write a chapter on events and include it all in that chapter? So that's why we do it situationally and not by social media platform. It also allows you to take out chapters or add new platforms to chapters as they emerge. We just have found it's a better structure for social media playbooks to do them situationally by chapter. So chapters might be product launches, special events, trade shows, thought leadership. We generally will include a chapter that we just call brand awareness, which is kind of, I don't know what to say in between. We'll just have like the general chapter so you understand what kinds of things you can or should be talking about in between major things you have going on. So those are the kinds of chapters. Playbooks can range from 5 to 10 or more chapters. It just sort of depends how extensive you want your social media program to be. The important thing about the playbook is to then launch it and train people how to use it so they understand what's in it. So we have always done that with our clients. Once we actually deliver the playbook, we actually then train people on how to use it. But again, if you're trying to convince your bosses that social media is important, you can take an audit and say, here's what people are saying about us and our competitors. You can take a playbook and say, here's our strategy. So these are pieces that will help hopefully make your job easier when you're trying to sell it to your bosses in terms of why social media is important to doing business for your company. Here is one page, sample page out of a playbook. So this is a chapter on crisis. So we had like general brand stuff up front. So you see that general brand best practice there. So we said, if you do choose to engage, here are the things to do. And then we got into Twitter, which was carried on to the next page too. One of the things we also talk about a lot is the 70-20-10 rule of content. You may see different iterations of the breakdown, but generally the idea is people say, I don't know what to say. And if you look at this breakdown, you only have to come up with 10% new content. That's not that much. The rest of the content really that you should be sharing is what we call unselfish. So it's industry or things that your followers would be interested in. It's not you trying to sell them anything. It's just you trying to help them. So that's another reason an audit can be really helpful to understand what kinds of things your customers are worried about, what's keeping them up at night, so that you can make sure that the content you're sharing reflects those, because then you're going to become a really valuable resource to them. Any questions on this? Or anything so far? Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you ever run into a situation where after you pass off the playbook and do the training, and for a while everything's going great, and their social media team just goes off the rails and just stops following it, and if so, what you do in that situation?
We haven't had that happen yet. I wouldn't say that it's because the social media playbooks are so awesome, but I think it's because most of our clients have really tight reins on their social media programs to start. Some of our clients, all social media goes through the corporate communications function. Some of our clients, social media exists in the businesses. So somebody who's charged with doing marketing communications for a specific business line gets the playbook and uses it. Generally, we have found that those folks don't really know what to do. So the chances that they are going to start doing something rogue is lessened if we give them a playbook to say, this is the right way to do it. So the thing about playbooks is you can't just create it once and deliver it and say, I'm done, because social changes so much. So even things like, I see brands doing this all the time and it drives me insane. When you tweet and start a tweet with a handle, the only people, anyone who follows me on Twitter knows I tweet about this all the time. The only people who see that tweet are the people who follow both you, Company X, and whoever you're talking about. Because that's how Twitter's set up now. It didn't used to be that way. So if you want every one of your followers to see what you're saying and you still want to start with a handle, put a period in front of it. That's why you see that period a lot of times in Twitter feeds. That's because we're tricking Twitter into thinking there's something in front of that handle. But brands do that all the time. So they're missing the opportunity to reach their followers because they don't know that simple Twitter rule. So obviously that's been worked into any of the playbooks we did before that rule went into effect. So then the last piece is monitoring. Monitor conversations daily. Elevate anything that needs to be elevated as soon as you see it. Hopefully you have a crisis chapter in your playbook so that you know what to do if and when that happens. And then adjust your program activities as you need to based on what you're seeing from monitoring. So again, if you've identified the 5 things you want to be known for and you are not seeing a lot of movement where you have worked on really developing content around those things you want to be known for, maybe it's time to realize that's just not of interest to our customers or employees or investors, whoever it is, and switch your strategy. But you're not going to know that unless you're monitoring regularly. So which platform should you consider? I talked about this a little bit already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. These are the ones generally that B2Bs use a lot. YouTube is a great place for B2Bs. You can do product demos or videos for how to install a product. Some companies are putting QR codes, which I don't know how everybody feels about QR codes, but some companies are putting QR codes on the packaging for their products that then you scan and it takes you directly to a video that shows you how to install that product. Okay, so the idea of how do you use existing social media channels in a way that is beneficial to the audiences you're trying to reach. I would argue also that obviously corporate blogs are an important piece here, and also the importance of visuals. So if you have pictures to attach to things, those kinds of posts get way more engagement than ones that are just straight text. So think about, can you turn some of your content into a graphic? I don't use the word infographic because most infographics are not infographics. They are designed Word documents. But it's still more graphically interesting than just seeing straight text. Yeah?
Do you see Google Plus moving like that?
Google Plus is one we watch a lot. We don't spend a ton of time with clients on it. We did, though, have one client who Google Plus they were finding it was really helping their search rankings. They also have really discrete groups of customers, so they were able to create circles for those customers and have really specific conversations. So that was really helpful for them. So again, that's all part of doing that strategy piece. If that makes sense for you, absolutely.
We're starting to move into that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But I seem to have a lot more, PR and social media conversations on my own Google Plus. Really, really in-depth, really nice conversations.
Right.
And I was kind of hoping to move that over to the business piece.
Right. Right. I think, again, it's figuring out which platforms make the most sense for your organization. I wouldn't rely solely on Google+, but, the content you share there can be shared in other platforms too. So this was just a quick chart that we put together. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because we're running short on time. But does social media make sense for your company? The gist is, if you have traditionally marketed, yes, social media makes sense for your company. It's just a matter of how do you translate what you've already done into the social media realm. So if you provide case studies to customers, maybe you do that as a multi-part blog series that's problem solution structured. So it's how do you most effectively use social for your business needs? Again, if you're a public company, Twitter is becoming increasingly more important for public companies. Tweets are being embedded into Bloomberg terminals. So, that just kind of goes to show you the extent of how social media is infiltrating all facets of communications. So if you still don't plan to do anything proactive, couple of things I hope you at least consider. One, reserve your social media domains across multiple platforms. This goes to the case study I shared earlier that the guy was squatting on the company's name. At least reserve the names and reserve them across all platforms and use the same handle, please, for the love of God, use the same handle. Because what happens when you don't use the same handle is that you make it really hard for people to find you. If they know you as Company X Inc. here and Company X _ Inc. here and then just Company X on another platform, they're never going to find you. So be thoughtful about how you're using and naming your accounts. Yeah?
That is a problem when you've got a long name, though, on most of the other platforms. Then you come across Twitter that only gives you so many letters.
Right. So it may be...
We had to abbreviate international.
Yes, which, not a huge deal, but you may then want to think about adjusting all of them to have INTL or however you did it across all platforms. Or there's that. So at least do this, even if you don't plan to do anything proactive to start. Start monitoring if you're not already. It looks like most of you are, so that's good. Establish social media guidelines for employees. This is another thing that we see a lot of. And a lot of times it's totally unintentional. So an employee goes to a customer site and checks in on Foursquare. So what? Well, you're now telling your competitors that that company is your customer. That may or may not be an issue for your company, but some companies are very protective about people knowing who their customers are. So if your employee doesn't understand that and goes and checks in at one of your customer sites, they've now basically acknowledged that that company is one of your customers. So that's a very specific example. There are lots of other things that need to go into guidelines. We call them guidelines and not policies because you can't really enforce them. I mean, you can, but it also seems less obtrusive to employees if you call them guidelines. They're less likely to feel like they're being big brothered. So things to also consider if you're already kind of doing those things. You may want to establish discrete accounts as it makes sense for your company. Again, I do not encourage having a zillion Twitter accounts. But if you have a discrete audience who really is only going to want really specific information from your company, such as your IR audience if you're a public company, you may want to think about creating a discrete account for your IR programs or for a really specific brand. But again, the more accounts you have out there, the more you leave it to, the more you leave it to your customers or your potential employees to find an account and think that's the corporate account because that's what they found first. So to really be thoughtful about how you're putting your presence out there is important. You may want to think about developing standardized hashtags for use across your organization so that everybody in the company knows what hashtags to use. So maybe you have a short list of 5 or 10 that these are the ones that we should always use to make it easy for our stakeholders to find information. Conducting regular training for marketers, communicators, other thought leaders. So a lot of times in a B2B company, people want the engineers to be blogging. Well, engineers don't always know how to blog. They're either way too technical or write a post that's this long or something like that. So providing training is really important as an ongoing part of managing your social media program. We also think it's a good idea to maintain or promote a list of corporate, SBU, or product-specific handles. If you are an account or company that has multiple accounts, make it easy for people to find. So maybe on your Twitter page, along the side, you just have all of the Twitter accounts that are related to your company so that you're telling people where to find the information versus hoping they find it. So how do you stay smart? Stay up on B2C trends. Like I said, what happens in B2C, B2Bs follow. So why not just follow what's happening in B2C and figure out how you can apply it to your company. Check out B2B specific Twitter accounts. There's a lot of them. And or websites like the B2B social media one that I shared earlier. Follow journalists and media outlets on Facebook. This is a huge source of information for me. So I follow the folks who write about digital on for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Mashable. All of those are places to get really good ideas about what companies are doing, and then it's your job to figure out how it applies to your company. Follow trade media and trade associations. Most of you probably are members of trade organizations and or have trade media that cover your company. Those organizations are almost always on at least Twitter. So follow them, engage with them. They're probably going to follow you back. Add them to one of your lists. Show them that you are trying to engage and become part of the industry conversation and not just being self-promotional. And take advantage of the B2B hashtag. There's a lot of people using B2B hashtag, or maybe it's a different hashtag that would be helpful to you. But use hashtags to find information, because that's going to give you information for people you may not already be following, but should be. So you may find people that you then want to start following. Or you can follow me, because I do share lots of this kind of information too. So last slide, we're doing good on time. Last slide is ways to find me after today if you want to. Again, you can email me questions. You can comment on the event recap I'll be posting. You can tweet me follow-up questions using that hashtag, or I'm sure I would be at the dessert table later if you want to try to find me there. So any other questions, comments, thoughts? Yes?
Going back to the playbook piece, how often do you update it? Just on an ad hoc basis or quarterly? And then how do you go about recalling the old ones? Or how does your client go about recalling with all the different communicators who are using it? How do you go about making sure that they're using the updated?
So we don't give hard copies out.
Okay.
It lives online. I only brought hard copy because it's hard to show, especially if it's housed on the client's intranet. So it always lives online, so you can update it whenever. That's why we did it that way. So when, now, does that mean our clients regularly update unless we nudge them? No. But, so we generally will update it if there's some major change to a platform, or if they're rolling out a new social media account. So maybe they decided to do an Instagram account, or they're rolling out a corporate blog. We've got to look at the playbook then and integrate that into the playbook. So there isn't a hard and fast rule in terms of how often to update it, but I would say have a quarterly reminder on your calendar just to at least think about it, and then to decide, because frankly, probably something has changed in 3 months, which is frightening, but that's just how the world of social media is.
Thank you.
Yes?
I have a question. For someone who is very late to the party regarding Twitter, I don't have a personal Twitter account.
Mhm.
I've recently taken on a role with my organization where I'm part of this, Twitter's my responsibility. How do you recommend becoming, up to speed on Twitter fairly quickly?
So someone once described Twitter to me as using Twitter as the difference between reading a book about swimming and then getting in a pool and swimming. It's totally different when you actually start using it. So my recommendation is always to create a personal account and start using it and understanding how it works so that you can then apply what you learned to your business account without risking saying something on your brand's account that could get you in trouble. So it's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but I think it's really important to have a personal account so that you can understand and use the tools and get to understand then how it makes sense for your business. Now, if you do manage multiple accounts, my recommendation is to use different, especially if you're going to use it on your phone, because that's where a lot of people are using Twitter a lot, is to use different apps to do that. So you can never accidentally tweet from your business or your company's account about the movie you went to see. So use, the Twitter app to for whatever you're tweeting for your company, and then use Echo Phone or some other client for your personal, so that you can never make the oops mistake and accidentally tweet from the wrong account. I also personally have folders set up on my phone. If you have an iPhone, I think probably with an Android you can do this too. So, I have all my personal social in one folder, and then I have another folder called Community Management. And that's where anything that I do for my company or for boards I'm on that I'm in charge of social media, which there's too many of, anything like that, you can put it all in the Community Management folder. And then again, you're really lessening the risk that you're going to accidentally tweet something you shouldn't have.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We have time, I think, maybe for one more question. Yes, no? Okay. Don't.
Will be available.
Yep.
too.
I will be here, and don't forget to come get your handy
Pass those out.
social media for unsexy B2B industry.
And I want to, let's give Lisa. Insightful. I just want to let you know that our keynote speaker, Danny Brown, will be speaking back in the auditorium that we were this morning. But please grab a lunch. Those are provided by Robert J. Events and Catering. Grab a lunch and then just go to the auditorium, and that's where we're going to actually spend lunch. So, and that begins at 11 o'clock. So we can thank you. And we'll pass these out. We're hoping.
Okay.